Hey there, welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Today's video is going to be one that I've been wanting to do for a while. It hasn't been requested, but it's hopefully this will be cool. Now, let's just get right to it because there's going to be a lot of work to do here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go through the process and document the installation of one of these. This is the LCD upgrade kit by McWill. This one specifically is for the Model II Lynx. Now, a couple things we need to talk about here. First of all, I have done this before, and that's a good thing, on a Model II, as a matter of fact, on one of my personal units. And a couple things I want to talk about on this. So first of all, these kits are pretty expensive. I ordered mine from Console 5, which has them available from time to time, not only for the Model II Lynx, but also for the Model 1, as well as the Game Gear kit as well. So they also have, McWill also developed a kit for the Game Gear, and that one's really good as well. I have that one too. So the kits are expensive. In fact, they're right at about $120, and then you still have your shipping on top of that. So why do I mention all this? I don't normally mention the price of the kits. Well, the reason I am mentioning this is because, to be honest, what I'm going to go through today is not for amateurs. Some people may not agree with me on this, but I'm going to tell you, if you don't have the right tools and if you're really not comfortable taking your time and working with small components, you could run into quite a few difficulties. More importantly, you just really need to take your time when doing one of these installations. But I'm going to go through the process in this video today. So let's get to it. Now, obviously, in order to do this kit, we're going to have a Lynx. In this case, specifically the Model II Lynx. Now, I'm actually going to be doing this mod for a client who has sent this to me, who's really been anxious to get this done, and they've been very patient. I've been busy with some other stuff. I'm sure you've seen my other videos recently related to the Genesis with the audio enhancements that I've been working on. So yeah, so we've got to make sure that we've got a Lynx Model 2 in this case. And obviously it needs to be working. I've already checked this one out. It's good to go. I am going to show you some screen footage of what this Lynx looks like now. To be honest, this one's not too bad. I've seen some that were much worse. The one I had personally that I modded about a year or so ago was far worse screen-wise than this one. A couple of other things to talk about. If you're going to perform this mod, I highly recommend you do two additional things. One, since you already have to take the whole Lynx apart, I highly recommend that you go ahead and recap the entire Lynx, the whole thing. It's really not that big a deal. All the capacitors, for the most part, are through-hole components. So, you know, you can desolder from one side and solder them right back in. It's not like working with surface mount ones like you would with the Game Gear and other more modern systems. The second thing, and this is probably the most critical, in fact, you shouldn't even try to skip this step. I don't care how cool or how awesome you think your Lynx is running, I would not skip this next step. The other step is that you need to make sure you replace all of the internal power regulation circuitry in the Lynx as well. The Lynx uses basically a Zener diode and MOSFET circuit to drop the 9 volts coming from the batteries as well as from the AC-DC adapter down to 5 volts that the actual Lynx circuitry needs. But if that Zener diode or if any part of those components should happen to fail, then what usually happens is it will send 9 to 11 volts straight to the processor chips in the Lynx and essentially, in most cases, fry it. Not good. Additionally, if the voltage isn't correct or at a acceptable level on the 5-volt line from your Lynx, you should not attempt this mod either, because anything more than about 5.5 volts, and actually even under that, so you really want to keep it right at 5 volts. But if your Lynx is really putting out more than 5 volts, like 5.2 or above, over time it's going to burn out the LCD kit that you're installing. And it's such an expensive kit, you just don't want that. So yeah, couple things. I just want to get those out of the way. You are not going to see me replace the capacitors or replace the power circuitry in this particular Lynx because I have been assured by the owner that this has already been done. They apparently purchased this off of eBay, refurbed, and they actually sent me emails from the seller who basically used Console 5's refurbishment kits for the capacitors and the power regulations. So I will double check it to verify that, but if that is the case, then this Lynx should be good to go and ready for the LCD upgrade. And that's all I'm going to focus on in this video, is strictly just replacement of the LCD itself with McWill's upgrade kit. I have the Lynx here. I've got a power cord into it, and I've got the game Road Blasters currently loaded into it. It was basically the first one I had in my set to pull into it, and it's a good enough one to show off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dim the light here on the spot that I've got on this Lynx, and I'm going to power it on so you can see what the current LCD looks like on the quality. So let's go ahead and power this off. And yeah, my overhead's going to try to compensate for this a bit, so let me kill that as well, and it's going to be completely dark at that point. I'm going to go ahead and power the Lynx on ahead of time. Okay, I think that's about the best as I can get it right there. I apologize for the delay in getting that all set up, but it's kind of tricky to get these old LCD type systems to set up and film well externally. Again, it has been recapped, so it does have decent sound. So yeah, this is what the screen looks like currently. And let's see, that's really about the best as I can adjust the brightness. It will go up higher, but then it's washed out. So that's about as good a picture as I think I can provide to you on this. So yeah, you've seen what it looks like. Let's go ahead and prepare this thing for its visual upgrade. Let's talk about what comes in the kit as well as what tools we'll need for this installation. So here's the basic kit that comes from Console 5 in this case, again is where I ordered mine. Let's take a look here. Okay, got our little plastic baggie here. I'll get that out of the way. If you're not familiar with the McWill kit, it also offers the ability to install a VGA output as well. So if you wanted to be able to show Lynx games on your flat panel or on a TV or something, if you have a VGA connector or a VGA input on your TV, you can actually pipe the video from the Lynx into it and play on a bigger screen, almost sort of like consoleizing the Lynx in a way. So the kit does include a VGA 15-pin D-sub connector for the upgrade if you wish to use it. The client on this one does not want the VGA, so this part will not be, I will not be showing the installation of this. I will be sending this back to the client in case they should change their mind in the future. So I'll set this off to the side. The other things you'll get in the kit is some stranded ribbon cable. This is basically old like hard drive IDE ribbon type cable. It's good quality stuff. I might use this. I might use something else. I also have this fancy rainbow kind of ribbon cable I use. It's a little bit longer, and I think the cable, the actual wire thickness is a little bit thicker. I have ribbon cable, so you'll get ribbon cable, but if you don't for some reason, you're going to need some ribbon cable or some good thin stranded wire to use. I'm also going to use some slightly thicker, larger actual stranded wire here, and I'm going to use these for power and ground connections. They're a little thicker, and I always prefer to use beefier wiring for the power and ground on any of my modifications instead of the stranded cabling. I might also use, instead of using the ribbon cable completely, I might also just use some of this 30 gauge Kynar wire that I've got, or speaker wrap wire. I've got a couple different colors of this. This is very thin, very small, but this is basically a single strand of solid core enamel insulated coating wire. I actually use this for quite a few projects. It's mainly designed for digital type circuits, not so good for analog. Kynar wire is another good choice for this if you wanted to go that route. Just be aware that again it is thin. It's kind of difficult to, I have difficulty stripping Kynar wire actually, because I usually end up breaking the end off that I'm trying to strip instead of actually getting the enamel insulation off. But so that's another idea, is some Kynar wire. You're also going to need, for sure, a number 2 Phillips screwdriver. The Lynx is a Phillips-based console to get into, so you're going to need a number 2 Phillips. You might also have a number 1 Phillips on hand just in case. I don't recall needing this before, but just in case, doesn't hurt. I would also make sure that you have a good set of some little needle nose pliers to help you hold on and grab things if you need to. I have a couple of different types. You might also need something like this here. I actually got this out of my, I got a whole little toolkit for soldering stuff. This has got like a aluminum brush on one end, and it looks like a flat bladed screwdriver, but it's really designed for cutting stuff. This comes in handy sometimes when I need to trim the wire up at the solder point, because I always cut it a little bit longer than I need to make sure I have proper lengths, and I can use this to cut it. Additionally, when I'm desoldering components on this, sometimes if there's a lot of flux, or if I need a little bit more solder mask stripped off to get a better point to adhere my cabling to, that's where the aluminum and steel brush wires on the end of this come into play, because they're good for scraping that off. So I might need that. Might not, but I might. Always have a good set of flush cutters ready to go. Again, this is to trim off extra leads and bits and pieces that you might need to trim away, hence why it's there. And let's see, I would highly recommend a good set of tweezers. I use these actually quite a lot, more than I thought I would. Been one of my best purchases I've ever gotten. I've also got another set of needle nose pliers here. These are a little smaller, obviously, for even smaller components, but either way it'll work. In fact, most of the time I end up using my tweezers instead of these, but you might want them. And then, of course, you're going to want some good wire strippers for that stranded cabling. This is my smaller pair that I have. They're okay. They're not the best, but they'd get the job done. Aside from that, other items you're going to want is you're going to want a good soldering iron, of course. I've got my Heiko 907 wand with the 936 station that I use. And you are also going to want some way to desolder components. I'm going to once again use my Heiko FR300 for this, but you could certainly use, braided copper strand or the copper wick. That's what I was thinking of. You could also, of course, use the standard hand vacuum pumps, but in this case, I'm going to be able to make my work a lot easier and quicker with my desoldering iron. Also, make sure you got some flux on hand. You're going to have to solder the wires to some fairly, they're not too small, but there is a couple of parts or points where it's going to be kind of close proximity to other components. The flux will help to make sure that the solder sticks to what it needs to and not necessarily to other components or bridging. So solder helps with that a lot. Since I'm going to have this Lynx apart anyway, I'm probably going to go ahead and clean the contact pins for the game cartridges themselves. So I've got my Deoxit or my Deoxide, or however you want to pronounce this one. This is the sort of off brand from Deoxit, but I like it. It works well for what I need it for. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If there's any other tools that I find out I need along the way, I'll of course mention them in the video, but I think that's the bulk of what we're going to need. So let's break down this Lynx and get to it. Here's the Lynx. I'm getting ready to disassemble it. If you've never disassembled the Lynx before, it can be kind of tricky to figure out. It's really not that difficult as long as you know how to get started with it. So the first thing that you're going to want is to make sure that you have something fairly soft to set everything on. I'm going to use this microfiber cloth I've got here. It's not the cleanest thing ever, but for what I'm doing, it'll be fine. Actually, let's see, this might be a slightly cleaner side. Well, no, it's not, but that's okay. It'll be fine. Okay, so you want to get something soft to set it on, because again, you're going to be setting it screen down to open this up, and you don't want to damage it if you can avoid it. So there's actually some screws hiding on the Lynx that you've got to remove, and that's where the number 2 Phillips comes into play. Let's talk about the screws. Where are they at? Well, you got some screws that are actually hiding underneath the grip, the rubber strip grips here. There's some screws there. There's also one screw hiding inside the battery cover. So take the battery cover off. You can already see it right there. And where did those go? See? You got so many tools laying around, you got to make sure you keep track of them. So yeah, you can see that right there, there's another screw as well that's got to come out of here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these screws and show you how this is, what it looks like on the inside. A quick note about these rubber grips. They can be reused. They are sticky on one side and not on the other, but you want to make sure that you store them in a way that they're not going to get gunky and get a bunch of dirt and debris on them. So you might also want to have some wax paper perhaps nearby, just to make sure that doesn't happen. I've actually got some plastic that I'm going to probably just kind of set it on to protect it. In fact, I think I may have just found the perfect use for the plastic baggie that this came with. So I'm going to set these down on this so they'll stick to it, but not too bad, and at the same time they'll prevent them from getting stuff in them. Okay, grips are removed. Now you can see the other screws that were hiding underneath them. Okay, those screws are now out. I do want to make note that these particular screws I just took out from the handle, or from the grips, don't know if I can get the camera to focus in on that. There we go. They are a different size and type from the one I took out from the battery cover, so make sure you don't confuse them. Certainly don't lose them. Okay, all the screws are out on the Lynx. We're ready to disassemble it. It's not too bad. The back cover just pops right off at that point. You can set it off to the side. And here we are inside the Lynx. This one's got a lot of stuff on it. Okay. So let me get this wiggled out as well. We got to be careful. We got the battery compartment. It's got a little piece of plastic that you got to carefully lift out of there as well. And then here's the rest of the unit here. Now there are some ribbon cables. You might just be able to barely see them. Let me get something to point with here. You got some old ribbon cables located right here and here. You're going to have to be careful, but those will have to come loose as well before you can get this main board off. There we go. That was pretty stuck in there. And then you've got two more wires holding on for dear life, and that is the speaker wire located over here, and I believe this one is the backlight wire for the, this is off the inverter circuit section for the cathode tube behind the LCD, the original LCD. Those will need to be separated as well, so I'll just pull these loose. There we go, just kind of walk them off and we are good. There's the main board and there's the rest of it there with the old LCD and backlight assembly. Now of course, as part of the kit, all this will be coming out and getting replaced, which is really cool. Okay, let's take a look here. For now, I'm not going to mess with this cover section with the LCD, or the old LCD just yet. Again, this will be coming out, but for right now, let's focus on the main board side of things. So I'm going to take this out of the way. So one of the first things we're going to need to do is actually remove some of the components off of the Lynx, and specifically most of the stuff here related to the inverter circuit assembly that powered up the original backlight on the old LCD. Everything within, get that transistor out of the way, pretty much everything within this section comes out. I have to take off this large induction coil. that's got to come off of there. We got these two transistors located right here that have to come off. And we also have to remove a couple of capacitors, specifically C56, which is this one right here. This one right here has got to come off of there. And also C55, yes, C55 is this little blue one that's hiding down right there. Maybe you can see it. So that's got to come off of there too. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and start removing these components. Okay, took a little bit of work, but I was able to get all of the solder loose off of this copper foil back here that they use as a central ground plane and as a giant, basically like an RF shield of sorts, I guess you could say. It is firmly held in place in this case by the cartridge connector or the cartridge port. So unfortunately I'm not going to be able to completely remove it, but at least with all of the solder off of it, I can lift it up out of the way as I need to get at individual components and to the different points that I'll need to solder to, basically right here. But I'm also going to have to get at this side because this is the side where I have to remove all the different components. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and get some stuff taken off of here, so bear with. Okay, I've now got all the necessary components removed from the high voltage power section that was required for the backlight for the original LCD. What I'm going to do now is I am going to clean up these via holes a little bit, get some of the little extra bits of flux and some little bits of solder I see off to the sides out of here. And then what I'll probably do is actually put some fresh coat of solder over each of these vias to prevent them from corroding in the future. So if for some reason somebody wants to, I don't know, maybe try to reinstall these components, it would be easier to do so because I wouldn't have any corrosion on the vias. So, because it was working the way it was, but of course these components have to come off in order to use this particular kit. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do now is get these cleaned up. There we go. See if my camera will focus in on that. There it goes. And I've got some fresh solder covering up all the vias on the components I removed. So, should be good. And they look pretty good on the backside too. What should you do with all the old components? Should you toss them? Well, you could, I guess, if it's your Lynx, but I'm not going to, because this Lynx doesn't actually belong to me, and these components are still good. What I'm going to do instead is I keep little baggies on hand that from components I got from Radio Shack or, you know, just wherever, and I'm probably going to put them all back into this bag and provide it back to the customer when I send it on its way. So with all those components removed, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get a multimeter, and we're going to want to actually plug this into some AC power. Yes, you heard me correct. And we're going to want to verify that we have a good 5 volts coming off the main power regulation unit. Most of the power regulation actually takes place in this area here. This is where the 2 MOSFETs are, and the Zener diode that's in place there to control it. But if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's at the top of this capacitor right up here that we'll want to check if our 5 volts is good plugged in. I'm now ready to check the power to make sure the power regulation circuit of the Lynx is good to go before attaching and going any further, because obviously if there's issues with the power area, you really need to replace all those components out. This one looks like they've been changed out, so I'm going to leave them as is, and again, it was not requested I do so by the owner, so I'm not going to mess with it, but I will, check the 5 volts to make sure we're good to go. Now, again, you really want to make sure it doesn't exceed about 5.3, 5.45 volts. So any reading you get really between like 475 to about 5.2 should be good to go. So what I had to do to get this set up so I can test it is obviously I have to plug it into AC power. I also had to reconnect the ribbon cable assembly for just the front panel buttons so that I can turn it on. Additionally, I have to make sure I've got a game still inserted in the cartridge port. So there are ways you can get around this. There are pins that you can short to force the Lynx to turn on without a game in it, but I prefer to set it up the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to push the power button here. Set this back down. Hopefully we can see all this. And I'm going to attach my ground probe to pin 12 of where the old high voltage transformer was for the backlight, just like that. And then I'm going to check for the 5 volts, my positive, from the positive input lead off a capacitor C22 with the, there we go. And I'm reading roughly 4.87 volts. So that should be good. That's more than we need to light up the LCD. And obviously it's not too high, so it won't cause any problems there either. So we're going to go ahead and proceed forward with the rest of the installation. All right, let's take a little break from the electronic side of it, and let's go ahead and get the step of getting the old LCD and backlight tube out of here. Because of course, the whole purpose of this kit is to get rid of that and replace it with a much better and more enhanced, much brighter McWill LCD setup. So as it turns out, remember I made a mention before about needing a #1 Phillips? Looks like I was right about that, because we have #1 Phillips size screws which hold the LCD lamp in place here. So I'm going to take those out right now. Do make sure you keep track of these screws, because I happen to know that you're going to need them again to attach the LCD, the new LCD down, because it mounts basically in place of where this old assembly was. Okay, there it is. Old LCD is removed. So again, what you do with that part is up to you. This screen is still functional. And that's really all we got to worry about as far as the LCD assembly goes. It's just, it was just 4 little screws and the whole panel came off. So that's cool. Yay. guess we're done with this part. Now, at this point, what I would do is, if you've got the chance to do so, you might want to go ahead and try cleaning up the interior plastic a little bit, just because, you know, there's going to be dust and such that collects in there, always is. And since you've already got it apart, it just, you know, would kind of makes sense to go ahead and do that. Also, if you have problems with some of the buttons not registering properly, it's probably because they might have some corrosion, basically just your human grease off your fingers over the years, making, you know, causing the contacts underneath to not make very good contact. So to get to those, you basically have to loosen up some screws here. And then this plastic assembly will pop off and you'll have access to the silicone membranes underneath to be able to clean that. I might do that for this owner as well, just because I'm not sure if that was done yet. So I'll do that off camera. Okay, so at this point I've got the LCD panel out of there, and we're ready to go ahead and begin installing the new LCD onto the original main board. So to get started, we're going to need to get ourselves some ground wire and some power. Now I've gone ahead and using some of the provided ribbon cable that came with the kit, I actually peeled the red wire off, which is this one here. Actually, it's just painted on one side red and it's gray on the other, but I'll use this as my power wire. That's fine. It's good for that purpose. And then I've got this green stranded wire here as well that I'll use for my ground in this case. So where do we need to attach these? Well, they're going to attach in spots where we actually removed some of the components previously. So the power, our positive 5, is going to come off of this point up here, off of the positive area of capacitor C22. That's where I actually checked for my 5-volt source earlier. And then the ground is going to come off of where pin 12 was, off of the high voltage block transformer from the backlight. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put those in right now. Okay, I got my ground and my power wires in place. Now it's time to attach a few more wires that we're going to need, such as for the backlight control and some things like that. So another wire that I need to solder in is for backlight control. And it actually has to come off of this tiny little point right here, just below Q10. There's a tiny little spot here. All right, so the area that we're talking about is right over here. Don't know how well that's going to show up, but basically I believe it's pin 2 off of this IC chip here. Alright, so yes, I'm going to need a small backlight wire. So for that, and as small as that via is, I might just use some of my Kynar for that. So I'm going to get this. You know what? I won't. As much as I want to, because that's a small wire point. I just realized that that's an area that's going to probably flex a lot, especially if you're trying to service this thing in the future. So I should probably use something else. Let's see, what else might I have that might work? It's not too bad. I got these black wires here. I have this yellow wire I was going to use originally for my power. Maybe I'll use that for the backlight instead. Yeah, I think I'll do that. So I'm going to put this in place, or at least I'm going to try to. Would be to actually use my scraping tool and scrape back some of the solder mask along the line, along the trace here, and do that. But it might almost be just as easy to throw some flux onto pin 2 and just solder it directly onto pin 2. So to be honest, I think that's the route I'm going to take. Yep, that's what I'm going to try to do. So let me get my flux here, lay that down. Alright, and I'll probably have to angle this a little bit differently so I can do this and kind of show how I set it up. Get this wire bent ahead of time. I think there's enough solder on everything I have here to do this, so I think we'll be okay. All right, that seemed to work well enough. Give it a little bit of wiggle here, make sure it's on there good. Looks like it is to me. I don't think that's going anywhere. And maybe set this off to the side. And we'll get the LCD assembly. Now I still have it in the plastic baggie here. So let me get it out of its little pink bag, pink poly bag. And here we are. Here is the LCD, the back side of the LCD. Now there's a couple of points we're going to have to solder to here, not the least of which is, and I have to move this ribbon cable out of the way just a little bit, so maybe you'll be able to see it. But we have a 5-volt pad here and a ground right here. And that's where the voltage and ground wires that I soldered onto the main board are going to go. And then we also have, along these points here, yes, okay. The backlight wire that I just soldered on is actually going to attach to this point right here, number 4. And then I'm going to need to solder a tiny wire from this pin here to the ground, and there's actually a couple of places I can do that. I'll probably just attach it to this ground point right here. On this one I will probably use just a small piece of Kynar, because this is not an area that's going to get moved around much. Once this wire is in place, it will stay as part of this LCD assembly. Now normally you wouldn't need to attach a wire from here to the ground. I'm doing that because we're not using the VGA. So what will happen when I do this is that the actual backlight button will control the 2 different LCD modes, which basically is scan lines or no scan lines. That's essentially what you get. So, all right, so let me go ahead and get some of these wires initially soldered up to the LCD panel, and we'll go from there. So here we go. Got this here. And what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and initially get some solder onto these pins just to make it a little easier. And I will also get some flux for that. Won't need much at all. Put a little bit on this ground pin. I'm going to put a little bit over here for the backlight and over here for this menu button. And then I'm going to need to put some over here for my voltage, positive voltage connection, and for the ground. All right. In fact, let me go ahead and get my piece of Kynar and go ahead and attach my menu button to its ground point. And then to make it easier to attach that Kynar wire, I'm going to go ahead and get some solder onto these pads. And go ahead and get my 2 ground points too. Now, you can, if you need to, disconnect this ribbon cable, but I've done this before and it's not too big a deal. If you're just very careful with it, you should be able to do it without having to disconnect the ribbon cable. Just got to work carefully. In fact, I'm going to put my solder through the other side of it here. There we go. There's the ground. Okay. Now to get that tiny little piece of Kynar wire installed. So let's see here. Let's start with this point. And get this tacked down. Okay. Flatten that out a little bit. Shape it. that's in place, good to go. So that'll work just dandy. Okay, that's good. I'm going to go ahead and attach this ground. I'll tilt this around a little bit so you can kind of see me get in there with it. In fact, I can probably, oh yeah, that'll work. I'm going to do the same thing with this that I was doing with my solder earlier. That is that I will just attach it on the back side like that. Of course, the real trick here is that I need a way to push it down. Got a feeling I'm going to be using my left-hand soldering skills for this one. Not as confident with my left, but I should be able to get it in there. Okay, that's in place. Now get the power wire. Run it through the same way. Now this one I've actually got more room here, so this I can grab quite easily. And get it where I need it. But once again, I am using my left hand for this. And this wire is being a punk. There we go. Okay, it's in place. There's quite a bit of solder that's left over there, so that's where my flush cutters come into play. Make it not look quite so ugly. That's much better. I put a little piece of shrink tubing on here. I didn't actually shrink it up. I just put it on here just to keep the wires together. And so everything's nice and tidy, and I've got everything all soldered back down, including the backlight wire here. So what's left to do now is to take some ribbon cable, like what I have here, which I've already kind of cut back a little bit and already tinned up all of the ends on this. And those are going to solder to all of these points along the bottom here. Just like before, I'm going to get my flux here, and I'm going to lightly dab each of these pinpoints. There are 9 total that you will solder to. Just like that. Alright, so just like before, I'm going to tin all these up with some solder first, just to make it a little easier. I wonder if I should actually turn this the other way. Probably. Okay. Hopefully you can still see that okay. It'll certainly make it a little easier for me to read it and do what I'm trying to do. Alright, here we go. Okay, those initial wires are in place. What I will do is fold them back like this. Kind of fold this down a little bit. Now what needs to be done is to take these same corresponding wire colors that I've put in place, and I'm going to have to solder them onto the back side of the PCB. These pins here. So there's a couple ways to do this. What some people will do is actually cut away this material, just because it's kind of thick and gets in the way. Some people will also actually remove the old ribbon connector. I'm not going to do that. I'm pretty sure that if I make these wires small enough connections, I should be able to just solder them directly where they need to go. But what I might do is I will probably go ahead and cut away some of this material just so it's not in the way and doesn't conflict with the wires going forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my flush cutters for this real quick since I have them here. Okay. All right. So I have everything in place and have the Lynx partially reassembled. You can see where I ended up cutting out part of the shielding back here to give myself more room and to make sure there weren't any shorts that would develop potentially with the wires and from the solder points that I have in place. So yeah, what I'm going to do is, instead of putting this completely together, I'm going to go ahead and put a game in it and set it down, and we'll fire it up real quick just to see how it looks. Let's go ahead and set this thing around really carefully. Now off camera, the other thing I did, since I already had it apart, was I went ahead and gave the cartridge port a good cleaning. And the way I did that, I do this basically with all game systems, cartridge-based systems, is I take like an old credit card. I just cut it up. I cut it up into a small piece like this. This is about inch and a quarter in width maybe. Maybe inch and a half actually. Yeah, about an inch and a half. And then I'll take like, in this case, I use an old white t-shirt that I don't really care about. I got a couple of them, you know, they get ratty and torn up over time. I just take the t-shirt and I just take one of the ends of it, you know, like this, and just kind of wrap it over the credit card like this. So here's the edge of the credit card. And then from there, and I'll just kind of turn this around sideways, I'll just take the shirt and the card. Now I will saturate the card or the edge of this with some alcohol. And then just taking the shirt and the card, just kind of go in and out with the pins like this. Just ran it through a bunch of times until it came out looking nice and clean. Honestly, this one was actually pretty decent. It didn't need much cleaning, but you know, did it anyway. It was already there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get some power plugged into it. Make sure, of course, you know, especially when you got the cover off, that you do plug the power into the correct port. Unfortunately, the Lynx design does allow a person to plug its power port into the headphone jack. Don't do that. That's bad. That'll mess things up. So definitely make sure you plug it into the power. Here's a game Road Blasters again. This is what we used last time, so I figured why not use it this time as well. So I've got the game in place. So I'm just going to lightly hold on to it here. And I'll dim the light again like we did before, but let me go ahead and power this on. You'll see a little brief scramble screen take place there. And there we've got Road Blasters, and just put it right here in front. Yeah, that's quite a difference. I see a moire pattern, or however you pronounce it, showing that's my camera. That's not the LCD, I assure you. Now, because they didn't, because this client did not want the VGA kit installed, the backlight button here, which is normally used to switch between LCD and the VGA connector, will switch between the two available LCD modes, which is basically this. You have normal the normal LCD look, and then if I push the backlight button, it puts it into a pseudo scanline type effect. And with the pseudo scanline effect, it dims it down just a bit, so it's a little easier on the eyes, I think. So, yeah, I would say this upgrade was quite the success. I'm sure the client will be very happy. So I'm going to go ahead and button this up a little bit. I'm going to try to clean it up a little bit as well. One quick note, when you go to attach this screw back down on the battery cover, be careful that you're not accidentally cutting through or crimping part of the ribbon cable assembly that's for the front panel controls, because it is also sitting basically right along this part here. And although it shouldn't naturally fall in line with the screw hole, it could be a possibility, so just be aware of that.